I can't be the only person that gets frustrated at all the fun hats that kids get to wear, and there's never adult sizes, so I designed the Wavelength hat. This is the short brim version. And then this is the long brim, and this is what we're going to be making in the tutorial. You can fold it back if you want. And then if you have enough fun in your life, there is also straight brim options. This is the short brim, and then there is a 5-inch brim as well. This obviously is for a baby, but we'll try it on anyway. I hope you enjoy the tutorial, and I can't wait to see what you make. To measure your head, put the tape measure around where a hat would naturally like sit on your head, and measure the circumference. Now each size has 1/2 inch of positive ease, so that's 1.2 centimeters, I believe. So it's just very slightly bigger than your head. But if you are in between sizes, I would recommend sizing up one, otherwise you're going to be really jamming it down onto your head. And then also the hat is graded up to 26 inches, which I had a couple of testers that had like very textured curly hair, and they said that that was an adequate amount, even though they measured around their hair and it did seem like they'd need a bigger size, but obviously the hat does squish your hair down a certain amount. So I would measure and then take that with a grain of salt. One of my testers said that her hair measured 28 inches all the way around, but the 26 inch was actually really good. If not, it was like very slightly loose on her, but with the chin strap she felt like it wasn't going to fly off. When choosing fabrics for a very beginner, I would recommend using something like a quilting cotton or like some sort of stable light to medium weight fabric that can interface really well. So stable meaning it's not like really liquidy, drapey, like a silky satin, something like that. And then to interface well, it just needs to not bubble up when you interface it, like some very lightweight fabrics. Some like nylon fabrics, they shrink a little bit when you heat them, so they can't really be interfaced with a glue, like a heat glue interfacing. However, if you do decide you are going to choose a fabric like this, or you really want to have like a sporty nylon Taslan one, like similar to the black ones that I've made, there is a way you can do that. So I will show you how, like, I thought I'd show you how to do that today. So what I've done is I've cut out my brim pieces in the fabric that can't be interfaced, and then I've also cut extra layers of that in like a fabric that can interface well and that's like kind of like structured and stiff. This is just full denim, I believe, and then I've interfaced it on the back. And you're going to use a technique called interlining, where you just put these two layers, this is my Taslan layer, and you put them wrong sides facing, and you're basically just going to baste a stitch all the way around the edge to hold them together, but we'll do it at 1/4 inch seam allowance so that it's hidden in the final seam allowance. And then you essentially will sew everything the exact same, but treating these as one piece of fabric. And of course, for the crown of the hat, you don't need to worry about that because it will just be a little floppier with the lightweight fabric. It doesn't need to be interfaced. Then for heavier weight fabrics, so I believe that this denim is 10 ounce. But when you come to sewing the crown pieces, you'll realize that there's 8 pieces and they all intersect at the top. So that could become really bulky. If you are choosing a heavyweight fabric, I would recommend that you hammer your seams. If you're new to sewing or you haven't sewn with heavyweight fabrics before, that might sound a bit funny, but a lot of people do that with jeans when there's lots of layers and they're going to top stitch. They hammer the seam flatter, and it will mean that it can get through your machine easier. I would not go over 10 or 12 ounces if you don't have a very powerful machine, because you could end up snapping needles, and when you get to that point then you can damage your machine. And I've even heard of people having bits of needle like fly into their eye and things like that, so please be careful. When you come come to cutting out your pattern pieces, there's a few things to note. Also, this is the smallest size. It's for like a tiny baby. It's so cute. But there's a little cross for the eyelet placement. If you do want to put eyelets in or embroider them, then make sure you mark that on the right side of all of your outer and lining crown pieces. When it comes to the brim, there is a long and short version of the wavy edge, and then there's a long and a short version of the straight edge. So whatever you're choosing, cut all of your pieces from that template. It says cut 2 outer, 2 lining, and 4 interfacing. When you do this, the outer will all be one color and then the lining will all be one color. If you want your brim to be the same on the top and the bottom, then cut 4 outer fabric and 4 interfacing and 0 lining. And then if you are going to make ties, then the cutting measurements for the ties are on the inventory page. I'm actually just going to use like this waistband drawstring and cut it down. You can choose whatever you like. Maybe you want to use like elastic so it's more comfortable. I've actually interfaced my pattern pieces, but I thought I would show you my favorite method of using Pellon SF 101 specifically. I don't like to put my iron on too hot. I usually put it on like the medium setting. I don't actually have like the type of fabric written out on this, but it would probably be like silk or something like that. I find that this interfacing shrinks slightly at a really high heat and can cause it to like bubble up instead of being even. And then you can see the glue dots and you can feel they're kind of rough. Put that glue side down onto the wrong side of your fabric. And then I just hold the iron on top, not moving it around or like anything like that. Just literally move it from spot to spot and hold it for like 5, maybe a little more, 5 seconds. And then you can check, you can see where it hasn't fused because it will like bubble up and you'll be able to see from the fabric side as well. But usually I try and leave my pattern pieces until they're fully cooled, because I feel like when the glue is wet, if you crease it, then the creases will stay in it because it's sort of like pliable. So we're going to prepare the brim, and I'm going to put my lining out of the way and just take my outer pieces. Now lay them right sides together, and we're just going to pin along the straight edges here. Well, let me just show you that. So you can see, like I saw that straight away, where it hasn't quite fully fused. Now you can just lay that flat and go back over that with the iron for a few seconds and it should be fused. Okay, I refused my interfacing. Now just pin the side seams. And you can do the outer and lining each individually, but I'm just gonna pin them both. So with my lining right sides facing, and then I'm going to batch sew them. And then press all of the seam allowances open. Now for a beginner, if you are doing wavy edges for the first time, I would recommend marking out the seam allowance. You don't have to do this, but it will just help you with keeping it a really even distance from the edge all the way around. You can use like a seam gauge or a ruler or something like that, and like you don't need to mark all the way. You can just do like little dashes. That gives you something as a guideline to sew between. Now to attach the brims, we're going to have the lining brim facing right side up, and then we're going to put the outer brim right side facing down on top of that. And then I would spend a little bit of time getting this all matching really nicely and pinned in place before we sew. down both layers of the seam allowance to 3/16 of an inch. And the reason that I don't like to clip into seam allowances, like you see how people clip into them like this, is because I feel like it makes the seam look like notched. Where the clip goes in towards the seam, it's like an angle. And I find if you just trim it down close enough, then it will sit flat after you press it. Now turn the brim right sides out and spend a little time like really getting the seams pushed out properly. I'm just pushing with my fingers, but you could get something in there to push it out as well. And then really press them flat. We need to baste the top edge of this together, both layers. So match up the notches and then match up the side seams and then match up everything between. And we're gonna baste this at 1/4 inch so that it's hidden within the seam allowance. So it's just gonna hold everything together when we're sewing like the crown onto the brim. And also I had a sample where it wasn't matching up well, and I just powered through because I was just obviously trying to get samples done to hash out all the details. And the brim on that hat, it's like it won't hang flat. It just sort of like waves in a weird way and like sticks up and sticks in. So it's really important that you get this pressed really flat and like basted exactly together. And if you can take off part of your sewing machine so that you can sort of like get part of the brim underneath while you're stitching, that can be really helpful as well. So now we're going to top stitch the brim, and each line is going to be 3/8 of an inch away from the last, starting 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, if that makes sense. And this is another opportunity that would be really good to mark out your seam allowance if you're a very beginner or you need a little help guiding your stitching. Again, you can just go around and dash lines with a chalk or a removable marking tool. Now the brim is finished, so you can put that aside while we prepare the crown. But before we start on the crown, there's 8 pieces, which means that there's 8 seams. And because of that, if you're off by like 1/16 of an inch, you're gonna lose or gain an entire inch from the circumference of the hat. So I highly recommend, if you need a little guide for the sewing, mark the seam allowance on the wrong side of your pattern pieces. Now to prepare the crown, it's kind of repetitive at first, so I'm only going to show you this once, but you'll take 2 lining pieces and put them right sides facing, and we're going to sew from the wide end down towards the narrow end, so pin in that direction. And do that with all of your lining pieces, and then do the same with all of your outer pieces. And now I have my pile of pairs here. I'm just gonna go through and sew them all in a batch. I'll back stitch at the beginning and end, but I'm not gonna pull it out and cut the thread, so I'm just going to move on to the next one. Now you're going to take all of your pairs and press the seam allowance open, and a pressing ham is very useful for this step, but I do not have one. So I just go from either end and press in towards the curve, and that seems to be good enough. And even though I'm using a denim that's kind of thicker, I'm probably not going to hammer at this step just because it's pressed really nicely. But as we get like more layers at the top here, as we start to add the pairs together, that's when you might need to hammer this seam here so that the machine can get over it. Once you have your stack of pairs, then we're going to top stitch on both sides of the seam. And I know it's very tempting to skip this step, but it really does help the hat hold its shape. So I would recommend persevering through and top stitching them all. I am going to go down one side and then just turn it and come down the other side. It doesn't matter which direction you stitch in for this step. And then also I like to just line up the seam line with like the inside of my foot, or you can also move your needle over so that it's just easy to get the seam allowance, because obviously you're not going to be able to see any of your seam allowance lines through the fabric. And the pattern piece is going to want to curl up. That's totally fine. It'll actually help you to make sure that the seam allowance is like flat underneath. You should be sewing through this layer of seam allowance to hold it in place. You just need to trim the seam allowance down on both sides. Obviously be really careful not to go through the stitching. And trim off the little corner at the top. Now we have all of our pairs all trimmed down. We're going to add them together, and again we're going to sew from the wide end down to the narrow end. And you should have 2 pairs of outer and 2 pairs of lining, and I'm just going to batch them, sew them again. Now I just went ahead and pressed these open, and I'm going to top stitch and then put them together and sew the 2 halves of the hat together. I'm not going to go through every step because I feel like you understand now, but when we get to top stitching this outer part together particularly, I do think that it's going to be really thick at the top here, so I'll show you how I hammer the seam flat to help me get through on the sewing machine. I'm just stitching the outer crowns together, and it's actually really thick here. I don't think I need to hammer it to get my machine through it, but I'm going to use this hump jumper just to get over the little hump here. So get up close to it and then leave the needle in the project, and you're going to lift the presser foot and then just place this underneath, like it goes either side of the needle. And it just makes it really easy to sew straight over it. Okay, I got a little too dark yesterday, so thought I would show you how I press the crown when it was more light. So I am going to start off by just pressing the seams that are like easy to get to from the edge. And then obviously if you have a pressing hand, that's great, but I usually just roll up a towel and put it over that, and then you can get in and press these seams. And as you can see, it is super thick, super bulky at the top here, and I can barely even like push it apart. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to hammer it flat just to flatten everything out. Usually I do this on my cutting mat so I don't damage the table, but I'm just going to put like 2 layers of the towel, maybe 1 layer is okay, underneath. And then I'm going to try and push this apart and get in there with the hammer if possible. The doggies do not like. It's okay, honey, come here. It's okay. And I feel like that's as flat as I'm gonna get it. But you'll see if you try and get under the machine when you haven't flattened it and it's too thick, like your needle will stop. Don't push it if that happens, because your needle could snap off, like I mentioned earlier. You can try hand cranking like through the really thick bit, but don't just like push on the pedal and try and like power through. And then the final note I will give you on top stitching when the crown is whole is make sure it's sort of like inside out, because otherwise if you have it like turned right side out while you're trying to top stitch, it's going to be really difficult to navigate under the machine. It naturally wants to curve like this so that it can get under the presser foot. And that went through like completely fine. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's probably 8 layers of denim in the middle here. So hammer your seams. To prepare the tie, all we're going to do is fold it in half lengthwise, wrong sides facing, so that the right side is facing out. And then fold the edges in towards the middle and then fold it in half again. So you've got this nice little thin strap. You can fold the end in like this before you sew, but I find it's really fiddly to like properly hide the raw edges, and we're going to knot it. I really like the look of having a knot at the end and then trim it down, but if you prefer to do it like a clean finish like that, then feel free. And then I really like to use a pin to just hold it in place as I'm folding. It just helps you to pull and fold much easier. And then just stitch essentially down both sides as close as you can to the edge. I'm going to start with the open end just so that it's closed up, and then the other side so it looks nice and cute. Now take the brim and have the lining side facing up. You want the straps to be on the inside, so attach them to the lining side, and you want to line them up right with the side seams. And I'm just going to go back and forth on the machine to make sure it's like strong enough within the seam allowance so that it won't show. Okay, both my crowns are finished, top stitched, trimmed, and now we're ready to add them to the brim. So have the right side of the outer fabric facing out, and then have the lining brim right sides facing out. And we're going to put that inside so that it's right side lining to right side lining. We're going to line up every other seam. So one is going to go to the notch in the middle of the brim, and then skip a seam, and then one is going to line up with the side seam of the brim, skip one, notch, and final one with the side seam. It might look like it's too long, but just play around with your fabric and like ease it in. I give the brim a tiny bit of a stretch and then just pinch in the middle here so that you can put a pin in. And it's not that it doesn't line up, it's just that this seam allowance is like getting smaller. Like it matches on this actual seam line, but then where the seam allowance is doesn't fully match up. But we're going to trim that off anyway, so. And again, I'm going to take away part of my crochet so that I can fit the hat under the machine. Now just push the lining through the hole and give it a really good press all the way around. Now I'm just going to understitch the lining to the brim so that it doesn't fall down. I put a note to change your bobbin thread out to match the lining if you're going to stitch it this way, or you can also like flip it and stitch it this way up. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you're not like stitching your straps down to the lining. And then just go around and trim off any excess seam allowance. And I'm just rolling the lining away so that I don't cut into it. Like just roll it away with your thumb as you go around. And then with the outer crown, to give a clean finish, we're going to press the seam allowance under before we attach it. Now we're going to take the folded edge of the outer crown and place it over the lining crown. And again, match up the seam lines and the notches. I'm going to put a lot of pins in this, but I highly recommend hand sewing before you go to the machine, and I will show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, I have my hand sewing needle threaded and one of these long nail thimbles. They are an absolute lifesaver. And I'm just going to do a running stitch, probably like each stitch about 1/4 inch apart, but it doesn't need to be even, it doesn't need to be neat. The goal is just to literally hold the outer crown in place and just cover this lowest line of stitching here. And I'll just do a couple of knots to hold the end in place so that it doesn't pull out, but you can just chop these off at the end. And now I'm just going to take this to my machine and basically stitch as close to the edge as I can. And then don't forget to go through and remove your hand basting stitches. Now I'm not going to knot mine because they have a little like cord stop on the end, but just tie a tight knot in the end of the strap if you have made them, and then I just like to try and pull it down as close to the end. And if you pull it really tight, you should be able to snip off close to it and it won't come undone. And if you used a synthetic fabric, you can also like light the end with a lighter a little bit. Just be really careful not to breathe in those fumes, but that will melt the end a bit as well and just further prevent any fraying. And then just to add the cord lock, squeeze it so the hole opens up. And then you can just thread your cords through. And if you don't want to do eyelets, then you're finished. So I actually ordered 1/4 inch eyelet setting tool and I don't have it right now. I need to check on where it is because it should have arrived by now. But basically I'm going to show you how to do it, and then I'm going to set a larger rivet just so you can see like the process. So start by just pushing a little hole where your marking is. You can use a pointy awl or a seam ripper and just like pull on the fabric a little bit. Obviously just be careful not to tear it. And then once you have your hole, use something bigger. You can use a pen or a pencil. I'm going to stick my scissors in here and just give it a twist and see if I can open that up a bit more. And then test out your eyelet. You should be able to just ease it in there. Doing it this way means that the fibers are really tight around the edge of the hole, and then when you hammer it in, it shouldn't fall out. However, if you are using like a very dense, tightly woven fabric, it's very thick, I would recommend using the hole punch, using a hole punch. One will come with the eyelet kit, and it should fit like exactly. If you have access to a smaller one, I would recommend going with the smaller one and then again pushing the hole open a little bit more before you put the eyelet in, or using something like fray check or liquid stitch that will just hold the fibers and glue them a bit so that the eyelets don't fall out. But go through with, I guess you would call this the male end, through the front. And then you should have like a little ring that you can put over the back that's going to hold the fabric in place. And then put it on your tool, right side's facing down. And then it will come with like something to hammer the edges in. Make sure everything's straight and lined up. And that is how you set an eyelet. Just be aware that like a lot of the cheaper ones will not be perfect on the back. So at best, this could be slightly uncomfortable. At worst, it could possibly tear your hair out. So I would invest in some nice eyelets, or you can embroider them on your machine or even hand embroider them if you want to take the time to do that. Maybe I'll make a video about that at some point. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you love your wavelength hat. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about fabrics or materials. I would be happy to help you in the comments, and tag me at Talia's Threads on Instagram because I really want to see your hat.